My aunt wanted to get guardianship of my disabled cousin to control his settlement money, so I settled her plans permanently. The first time I realized something was wrong was when I found my cousin Derek sitting in his wheelchair staring at an empty refrigerator while Aunt Lydia drove a brand new Lexus. Derek was 23 and had severe cerebral palsy from medical malpractice during birth. The settlement from the hospital had been $2 million, placed in a trust managed by my aunt as his legal guardian. I was visiting after work, bringing groceries because Derek had texted me 3 days in a row asking if I could spare any food. When I opened the fridge, there was a single yogurt cup and half a loaf of bread. The pantry held nothing but expired crackers. Derek's wheelchair was falling apart, one wheel making grinding sounds every rotation. The apartment was freezing because Aunt Lydia claimed she couldn't afford to run the heat, but outside in the parking lot sat her $50,000 vehicle with temporary plates purchased just last week. I started taking photos immediately. Derek's speech was difficult to understand because of his condition, but he'd learned to type on a tablet mounted to his wheelchair. He showed me bank statements he'd managed to access through the online portal. The trust was supposed to provide $4,000 monthly for his living expenses, medical needs, and personal care. The statement showed regular withdrawals of exactly $4,000, but Derek was living on almost nothing. I photographed every page while Derek watched the door nervously. "She checks my tablet," he typed. "Deletes things. Passwords changed monthly." I downloaded everything to my phone and cloud storage before Aunt Lydia returned. When she walked in carrying shopping bags from expensive stores, she acted surprised to see me. "Oh, you should have called first," she said, setting down bags that contained designer shoes and clothing. I asked why Derek's fridge was empty, and she claimed he'd just eaten all his groceries yesterday. Derek's expression told me this was a lie. That night, I started building a timeline. Derek had received his settlement 3 years ago when he turned 20. Aunt Lydia, his mother, had been appointed guardian automatically because she was his parent and he was legally incapacitated. The trust documents I found online showed strict guidelines for fund usage: medical care, housing, nutrition, therapeutic equipment, personal needs. Everything was supposed to be documented with receipts. I requested copies of the trust accounting from the law firm managing the fund. They required guardian approval, which meant Aunt Lydia. I created a fake email account using her name and sent the request from there. The law firm's assistant was careless, sending the records to the fake account within 2 days. What I saw made my hands shake. 3 years of falsified receipts, medical equipment charges for items Derek never received, therapy sessions at facilities that didn't exist, housing costs triple what the apartment actually cost, every category inflated, every dollar accounted for on paper, every penny actually going into Aunt Lydia's pocket. I visited Derek again with more groceries and a hidden camera disguised as a pen in my jacket pocket. Aunt Lydia was there this time, and I recorded her berating Derek for asking me for food. "You're making me look bad to the family," she told him. "If you tell anyone else you're hungry, I'll have to move you somewhere you can be properly supervised." The threat was clear. Derek's eyes filled with tears, and he apologized through his speech synthesizer. After Aunt Lydia left the room, Derek typed rapidly on his tablet. "She's filing for permanent guardianship next month. Said once it's permanent, no one can question her decisions ever again." My stomach dropped. Temporary guardianship required annual reviews. Permanent guardianship was exactly what it sounded like. No oversight, no accountability, no way for Derek to ever escape. I had 30 days to stop this. The attorney handling the guardianship petition was someone Aunt Lydia had hired privately, not the public defender Derek should have been assigned. I showed up at the law office unannounced, introducing myself as Derek's cousin and expressing concern about the permanent guardianship filing. The attorney, a middle-aged man named Gerald Finch, looked uncomfortable. "Your aunt has assured us she has Derek's best interests in mind," he said carefully. I asked if he'd visited Derek's living conditions or verified any of the medical documentation Aunt Lydia had submitted. His hesitation told me everything. "The family court relies on guardian reports," he explained. "Unless someone files a formal objection with evidence of mismanagement, the judge typically approves permanent guardianship for parents of disabled adult children." I asked what constituted evidence. Gerald's expression suggested he thought I was wasting his time. "Financial records, medical assessments, testimony from care providers, substantial proof of mismanagement, not just family disagreements." I spent the next week gathering everything. I hired a private investigator who photographed Aunt Lydia's lifestyle. The new car, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners at restaurants 3 times a week. She lived in a house worth $400,000, purchased 18 months ago with a cash down payment of $100,000. Her reported income as a part-time administrative assistant was $30,000 annually. The math didn't work. Meanwhile, Derek lived in a subsidized apartment with broken heat, empty cupboards, and medical equipment so old it barely functioned. The investigator also discovered Aunt Lydia had taken 2 luxury vacations in the past year: Las Vegas and Miami, staying in 5-star hotels, gambling at casinos, charging everything to credit cards that were mysteriously paid off immediately after each trip. The trust statements showed large medical equipment purchases on the exact dates she'd been gambling in Nevada and Florida. Derek's doctor was my next stop. I claimed to be coordinating family care and needed to understand Derek's current treatment plan. The doctor, an older woman named Dr. Patricia Keene, pulled up Derek's records and frowned. I haven't seen Derek in over a year, she said. His mother canceled his standing appointments and never rescheduled. I asked about the therapy sessions and medical equipment that trust statements claimed were ongoing. Dr. Keene's expression darkened. What therapy? Derek needs physical therapy 3 times weekly to maintain mobility, but his mother said she couldn't afford the copays. I showed her the trust accounting records listing thousands of dollars in therapy charges. Dr. Keene photographed the records with her phone. This is medical fraud, she said flatly. These sessions never happened. I'll need to report this to the State Medical Board and Adult Protective Services. I asked her to wait 1 week, explaining I was building a comprehensive case. She agreed reluctantly but made me promise to act fast. My cousin's tablet revealed more when I visited with a tech-savvy friend who recovered deleted files. Aunt Lydia had been deleting Derek's communications with other family members. Messages to his grandmother asking for help. Emails to former friends describing his living conditions. Even texts to me that I'd never received because Aunt Lydia controlled his phone plan and had set up filters. We found dozens of deleted messages spanning 18 months. In them, Derek described being left alone for entire weekends without food. Aunt Lydia taking his pain medication and giving him only half doses to make the prescription stretch. Being told he was worthless and should be grateful she didn't put him in a state facility. My friend backed up everything to 3 separate cloud accounts before Aunt Lydia's car pulled into the parking lot. We left quickly, but not before I installed a small monitoring app on Derek's tablet that would forward any deleted messages to my email. The family dynamics were complicated. My mother, who was Aunt Lydia's older sister, had always been the responsible one who cleaned up Lydia's messes. Growing up, Aunt Lydia had been the troubled younger sibling who made bad choices, borrowed money she never repaid, and blamed everyone else for her problems. When Derek was born with severe disabilities from the medical malpractice, my mother had offered to take him in and raise him. Aunt Lydia had refused, seeing an opportunity. She'd fought hard for custody during her divorce from Derek's father, not because she loved her son, but because she knew a lawsuit was coming. The $2 million settlement had been her goal from the beginning. Derek was never a son to her. He was a lottery ticket. I contacted Derek's court-appointed advocate, a social worker named Jennifer Wu, who was supposed to review his case annually. Jennifer seemed harried and overworked when we met at a coffee shop. I have a caseload of 63 disabled adults, she admitted. Derek's file shows his mother providing adequate care. I do home visits, but they're scheduled in advance and everything always looks fine. I asked what would happen if I provided evidence of financial exploitation and neglect. Jennifer's demeanor changed immediately. If you have proof, I can request an emergency hearing to review the guardianship, but it needs to be solid. Family members often make accusations based on personal conflicts rather than actual abuse. I handed her a USB drive containing everything I'd gathered. Bank statements, photographs, doctor's statements, deleted messages from Derek, evidence of Aunt Lydia's luxury spending. Jennifer reviewed the files on her laptop, her expression growing grimmer with each document. This is extensive exploitation, she said finally. I'll file an emergency motion tomorrow. Aunt Lydia found out about my investigation when Jennifer made her surprise home visit 3 days later. I received a vicious phone call within an hour. You have no right interfering in my relationship with my son, Aunt Lydia screamed. You're trying to steal his settlement money for yourself. I'm going to file harassment charges and get a restraining order. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. When she finally stopped yelling, I spoke calmly. I have documentation of every dollar you've stolen from Derek's trust. 3 years of falsified receipts, forged medical claims, and financial abuse of a disabled person. You can either agree to resign as guardian voluntarily, or I'll make sure the prosecutor sees all of it. Aunt Lydia's laugh was harsh. You can't prove anything. I'm his mother. Any judge will believe me over you. I hung up and immediately filed a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services, attaching all my evidence. The emergency guardianship hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Jennifer arranged for Derek to receive emergency food assistance and had a county social worker check on him daily. Aunt Lydia responded by trying to move Derek to a different apartment without notifying anyone. She claimed his current place was unsafe and she'd found better housing. Jennifer blocked the move through the court, arguing that relocating Derek would interfere with the investigation. Aunt Lydia showed up at my workplace the next day, causing a scene in the lobby. You've always been jealous of me, she shouted while security escorted her out. You're destroying my life because you want Derek's money. Multiple coworkers witnessed the incident and provided statements when I filed for a protection order. The irony of her accusing me of wanting Derek's money while she'd stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars wasn't lost on anyone. My mother finally got involved when Aunt Lydia called crying about my supposed conspiracy against her. Mom showed up at my apartment demanding to know what was happening. I showed her everything. The empty refrigerator photos, the bank statements, the deleted messages from Derek begging for help, the evidence of Aunt Lydia's luxury spending while Derek went hungry. My mother's face went pale as she reviewed document after document. I knew Lydia had problems, but I never thought she'd hurt her own son, Mom whispered. I reminded her that Derek had never been a son to Aunt Lydia, just a source of income. Mom made the decision then to support my efforts completely. She contacted other family members, sharing the evidence and asking them to provide statements about Aunt Lydia's behavior and Derek's living conditions. The family began dividing into camps. Aunt Lydia's sisters rallied to her defense initially, claiming I was exaggerating and that Lydia had always struggled financially. But my mother was persuasive, and one by one, relatives who'd visited Derek's apartment began admitting they'd noticed problems. His grandmother remembered Derek being unusually thin and wearing clothes that didn't fit. An uncle recalled Derek asking for money to buy groceries and being told by Aunt Lydia that Derek was lying about being hungry. A cousin mentioned seeing Aunt Lydia's expensive purchases and wondering how she afforded them on her salary. Each family member's observations added weight to the case. Aunt Lydia tried to control the narrative by claiming Derek's disability made him confused and unreliable, but too many people had seen the evidence firsthand. The private investigator uncovered more disturbing information. Aunt Lydia had a boyfriend named Kevin Stokes who'd been living with her rent-free for 6 months. Kevin had a criminal record including fraud and theft. He drove a motorcycle purchased with a cash payment of $12,000 last summer, right after a large medical equipment charge appeared on Derek's trust statement. The investigator photographed Kevin wearing expensive watches and designer clothing, none of which he could afford on his income as an unemployed mechanic. It appeared Aunt Lydia had been using Derek's settlement money to support her boyfriend's lifestyle. When I shared this information with Jennifer, she added it to the motion. Financial exploitation was one thing, but using a disabled person's funds to benefit a romantic partner with a criminal history added another dimension of wrongdoing. Derek's deleted messages revealed he'd tried to report his mother's abuse multiple times. He'd called the Adult Protective Services hotline twice, but Aunt Lydia had been present both times and convinced the social workers that Derek was confused and upset about normal parental boundaries. He'd emailed his court advocate last year describing being left without food for 3 days, but the email had been deleted from his sent folder and never reached Jennifer. He'd even attempted to file a police report, but the officers had contacted Aunt Lydia, who'd explained that Derek sometimes had episodes where he made false accusations due to his cognitive impairment. The system had failed him repeatedly because everyone defaulted to trusting the guardian over the disabled adult. The pattern was systemic and infuriating. 2 weeks before the hearing, Aunt Lydia made her biggest mistake. She attempted to withdraw $50,000 from Derek's trust, claiming it was for emergency medical equipment and home modifications. The bank flagged the transaction as suspicious given the ongoing investigation and notified Jennifer. Aunt Lydia's explanation was that Derek needed a new wheelchair and bathroom safety equipment. I visited a medical supply company and got quotes for the exact equipment she'd claimed to need. Total cost was $8,000. When confronted about the discrepancy, Aunt Lydia claimed the rest was for future medical needs. Jennifer filed an emergency motion to freeze all trust accounts pending the hearing outcome. Aunt Lydia lost access to Derek's money entirely. The retaliation was swift and cruel. Aunt Lydia stopped visiting Derek completely, claiming she was too emotionally devastated by my false accusations. Derek was left without anyone to help him with basic care tasks that required a second person. I started visiting daily, bringing food and helping with whatever he needed. My mother joined in, and we created a schedule with other family members. Derek's grandmother came twice a week. My uncle helped with wheelchair maintenance. Derek began receiving the kind of family support he should have had all along. He gained weight, smiled more, and started expressing opinions about his own care. Without Aunt Lydia's constant control and criticism, his personality emerged. He was funny, intelligent, and had strong opinions about movies and music. He'd been suppressed for years. Aunt Lydia's attorney tried to negotiate a settlement 3 days before the hearing. Gerald Finch called Jennifer proposing that Aunt Lydia would resign as guardian in exchange for no criminal charges and no requirement to repay the stolen funds. Jennifer consulted with me and Derek before responding. Derek's typed message was clear. She needs to face consequences. Other disabled people have guardians who steal. This needs to stop. Jennifer rejected the settlement offer. Aunt Lydia would have to answer for every dollar stolen and face potential criminal prosecution. Gerald withdrew from representing her immediately afterward, citing ethical concerns about continuing to advocate for a client engaged in ongoing fraud. The guardianship hearing lasted 6 hours. Aunt Lydia appeared without an attorney, representing herself and claiming she couldn't afford legal representation. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Brennan, questioned how Aunt Lydia could claim poverty while driving a $50,000 car. Aunt Lydia's explanation was that she'd received an inheritance from a distant relative. I submitted documentation proving no such inheritance existed. The judge reviewed the trust accounting records line by line, comparing them against actual receipts and medical records. The discrepancies were massive and undeniable. Aunt Lydia tried claiming she'd kept poor records but had always acted in Derek's best interests. Judge Brennan's response was withering. Miss Vargas, you charged your son's trust for medical equipment he never received, therapy sessions that never occurred, and living expenses triple his actual costs, all while he lived in poverty and went hungry. These are not record-keeping errors. This is systematic theft from a vulnerable person under your care. Derek testified through his speech synthesizer with Jennifer's support. He described years of neglect, emotional abuse, and financial exploitation. He explained how his mother had isolated him from family members who might notice his living conditions. He showed photos on his tablet of his empty refrigerator, his broken wheelchair, his inadequate clothing. Most powerful was his statement about what the money should have been for. The settlement was supposed to help me live with dignity. Instead, my mother used it to live a luxury lifestyle while I suffered. I just want to be safe and have enough food to eat. Several people in the courtroom were crying by the time he finished. Aunt Lydia stared at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with her son. My testimony focused on the investigation and evidence gathering. I walked the judge through the financial records, showing exactly how much money was missing and where it had gone. I presented the photographs of Aunt Lydia's luxury purchases, her vacations, her boyfriend's expensive gifts. I submitted the deleted messages Derek had tried to send asking for help. I provided statements from doctors confirming that medical services charged to the trust had never been rendered. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. When Aunt Lydia's turn came to cross-examine me, she had no questions. She sat silent, defeated, realizing the extent of the case built against her. Judge Brennan's ruling was delivered without hesitation. Aunt Lydia was immediately removed as Derek's guardian and permanently barred from serving as anyone's guardian in the future. The judge ordered a complete forensic audit of the trust to determine exact amounts stolen. Aunt Lydia was ordered to repay all misappropriated funds, with criminal charges recommended to the district attorney's office. The judge appointed Jennifer as Derek's temporary guardian until a suitable permanent guardian could be found, with my mother and me listed as backup options. Most significantly, Judge Brennan ordered law enforcement to investigate whether criminal charges for financial exploitation of a disabled person, fraud, and theft should be filed. Aunt Lydia left the courtroom escorted by court security, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. The forensic audit took 2 months and revealed even worse theft than I'd documented. Over 3 years, Aunt Lydia had stolen nearly $600,000 from Derek's trust. The auditors found falsified receipts, forged signatures, and payments to fictitious companies that were actually accounts she controlled. She'd created an elaborate scheme to drain Derek's settlement systematically while maintaining plausible deniability through fake documentation. The district attorney filed criminal charges including financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, theft over $100,000, fraud, and forgery. Each charge carried potential prison time. Aunt Lydia hired a criminal defense attorney who immediately tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor's office refused, wanting to make an example of guardian abuse cases. Derek's life transformed rapidly once he had proper support. The trust began being used for its intended purpose. He received a new power wheelchair with the latest assistive technology. His apartment was modified with proper safety equipment, temperature control, and accessibility features. He started physical therapy 3 times weekly and began regaining mobility he'd lost from years of neglect. A nutritionist helped him gain weight healthily, and he started receiving proper medical care for his cerebral palsy. Most importantly, he connected with other disabled adults through community programs and made friends for the first time in years. Watching him laugh and engage with peers was proof that he'd been capable of so much more than Aunt Lydia had ever allowed. My mother became Derek's permanent guardian after a 6-month review period. Unlike Aunt Lydia, she welcomed oversight and documentation. Every purchase was receipted, every medical appointment documented, every decision made with Derek's input and preferences. Mom set up a system where Derek had control over personal spending money and made his own choices about daily activities within his abilities. She involved him in decisions about his care and respected his autonomy. The contrast between her guardianship and Aunt Lydia's exploitation couldn't have been more stark. Derek thrived under care that actually prioritized his well-being over financial gain. Aunt Lydia's criminal trial was scheduled for 8 months after the guardianship hearing. In the meantime, she faced civil consequences. Derek filed a lawsuit to recover the stolen funds plus damages. Aunt Lydia was forced to sell her house, her car, and most of her possessions to begin repayment. Her boyfriend Kevin left her immediately when the money dried up, proving he'd only been interested in her access to Derek's settlement. Aunt Lydia moved into a small apartment and took a full-time job to pay her attorney fees and court-ordered restitution. The lifestyle she'd built on stolen money from her disabled son collapsed completely. Family members who'd initially defended her grew silent as the full extent of her theft became public knowledge. She was uninvited from family gatherings and cut off from the relatives who'd once made excuses for her behavior. The criminal trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Aunt Lydia's systematic exploitation. Bank records, forged receipts, photographs of luxury purchases, testimony from Derek and family members, statements from doctors confirming medical fraud. Aunt Lydia's defense was that she'd been overwhelmed by Derek's care needs and made poor financial decisions, but the evidence of deliberate fraud was too strong. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. At sentencing, Derek provided a victim impact statement through his speech synthesizer. My mother stole my chance to live with dignity. She saw me as money, not a person. I hope she understands now that disabled people deserve better. Judge Brennan sentenced Aunt Lydia to 6 years in prison, followed by 10 years of supervised probation, during which she'd be prohibited from working in any caregiving capacity or serving as anyone's guardian. Derek used a portion of his recovered settlement to start a nonprofit organization providing advocacy and oversight for disabled adults with guardians. He partnered with Jennifer and other social workers to create a monitoring system that would catch exploitation earlier. The organization offered free auditing services, helped disabled people report abuse, and trained court advocates to recognize warning signs of guardian misconduct. Derek's case became the catalyst for statewide guardianship reform legislation, requiring more frequent oversight and making it easier for disabled people to report abuse without fear of retaliation. His suffering led to systemic changes that would protect countless other vulnerable adults. 3 years after Aunt Lydia's conviction, Derek moved into a supported living apartment where he had independence with access to care when needed, surrounded by friends, finally safe. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.